Thank you so much for being here. Thanks for taking the time. And I want to mention a couple of your works that I've appreciated over the years. Rethinking the Adolescent and Adolescent Literacy was the textbook for a course that I taught a few years ago. A course with a very problematic title. It was something like Teaching Struggling Readers in High School or something like that. So not the best title for the course, but a great book to include in that course. And then Letting Go of Literary Whiteness being another one of your books that I really appreciate as well.
Wow, thank you so much. That is so humbling. Thank you so much.
Well, absolutely, absolutely. Glad to share about your work and glad to have you here. Curious by means of a first question about your background in education and the draw to looking at literacy and issues of social justice.
So I'm from Southern California, and I started my teaching career there by accident. I needed a summer job
Hmm.
when I moved back home, and I started. I mean, really, could have been like anything that summer, and it just happened to be teaching sort of by accident. And I did a terrible job, but because I had no training and had no idea, but I loved it and just felt so horrified by what I didn't know that I just kept at it. And that was at a in so I'm from just outside of LA. I grew up in a suburb of Los Angeles, and there's well, it's super racially diverse in Southern California, as you know. And I started working at a Korean-owned academy that like 95% of the kids that went there were Korean and Korean American.
Hmm.
And these kinds of schools are in Greece too, where it's like I call them enhancement schools. It's after school, weekends, and summers. And those were my hours. And I would keep like up to 40 hours a week doing like SAT verbal classes. I taught middle school literature. I taught high school literature classes. I did that for 10 years on the side of a PhD program that I started down there that I left. And then also while I was teaching middle school in my old middle school in Southern California, that was predominantly Latinx students. Um, I could have retired there if my life didn't lead me to New York City.
Hmm.
Loved my job. I gave the retirement speech for my math teacher 18 years after she was my math teacher in middle school. I loved it. I loved the students. I had lunch every day with these smart women.
Hmm.
Was all social studies teachers, but I loved the English department too. Anyway, I loved all of that. And then I moved to New York for personal reasons and thought, um, I left my first PhD program. I like to tell my students I'm a PhD dropout, which was an English literature PhD. It was a culture wars, and you kind of needed to look like what you were studying. And I was
Uh-huh.
very interested already in like Native American literature and African American literature and Asian American literature and post-colonial theory. And I see now that people made it work, but I wasn't sure that I was going to be able to. And it was just a tough time for me anyway. It was just not a good fit. And so I left and started teaching, went back to teaching middle school, and then
Mhm.
moved to New York City for personal reasons and just threw my hat into a PhD program in case things on the personal side didn't work out. And the personal stuff didn't work out, but the PhD worked out the second time. And this was an English ed. And I loved it. I loved it, loved it, loved it. I was in New York City schools for the whole 9 years I was there, got to teach graduate level courses for 8 of my 9 years, supervised. I mean, by the end of my 9 years, I might have supervised over 100 teachers into New York City schools, and I loved every minute of it. And then I got a job offer up in Western Massachusetts, had never even been up here before, but we had family in the area. Family means a lot to me. So
Mhm.
we're like, yeah, let's try this out. That was 13 and a half years ago. And the surprise in this position, I kind of fall into positions and then don't realize how much I'm going to love them. This keeps happening to me.
Mhm.
And this place I love because it's a first gen school, lots of working class students, which are really appropriate to my newest area of scholarship and research. But it's not like I figured all that out. It just happened.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I love it. I love my students. I have great colleagues. Um, I'm the only English ed person in the English department, but I've found my people at this campus too. And I wouldn't have done any of the books you talked about. I mean, I might have done the adolescent stuff. I started that in New York already, but Letting Go would not have been written in New York. I wouldn't have thought to work on that. I don't know that I would have worked on myself that way if
Mhm.
I weren't facing a predominantly white body of students at a predominantly white institution. By that point, our boys had come, and we're a multiracial adoptive family. And so all of these came together. And then I made a wish for Carlin Borshine Black, and she appeared in my life. And I got to be an apprentice. And so I kind of feel like things happen by accident that way. But as far as I don't know that I was asked this on an interview once, like, what does your work have to do with social justice? Like, what parts of your work? I'm like, I can't think of a single thing that I write at all that doesn't have a social justice, not a bent. Like, that's what it is. The adolescent stuff was meant to honor youth in non-demeaning, non-degrading ways. And obviously the race work is so important, and we have so much work to do as white people, identify as white. And now this newest area is on social class, and I am on fire about it,
Yeah, yeah. There's so many things that I appreciate about what you just said and sharing your journey, because I feel like sometimes people think, well, if my journey isn't linear, there's just something lesser about it, or there's something wrong with me, or there's something not normal, or whatever it is, whatever normal even is. Um, so really interested in your work on class, because I am a former high school dropout, dropped out of high school. Uh, Checked out things in the world of college and thought, oh, this is not bad. My wife really encouraged me to go to college, and I liked it so much that I just kept going back all the way to the PhD. So just hopefully an encouragement to educators out there listening, and folks that are tuning in, that uh, paths that occur in straight lines can only be found in certain equations in certain math classes. I don't know anyone with a perfectly linear path.
I have chills all over. Like, if you were a student that walked into my class, I'd be like, I could tell, I would know already you'd be one of my favorites, because I tell them, like, oh, how lucky your future students that they get you. Because, you think you're going to teach the honors student that you might have been if
Mhm,
we get honors in our class, and that's great. But the majority of students aren't going to turn out to be English majors, and that they need someone who gets that. I mean, I didn't speak English when I went to school. I was born to immigrant parents in Southern California, so I learned English in school. This was not predictable. My path was not predictable. I'm the only one with a college degree in my family. Um, the PhD, the first round that didn't work out, that was like an act. Everything felt like an act. Other people would see things in me, and then I'd be like, all right, what is a graduate degree? I have no idea.
mhm, mhm.
I didn't know what the SAT was until the night before, and I became an SAT instructor. Like, none of this, it just doesn't make any sense. But it is a very classed story,
Yes. Yeah.
mine. Very classed story. Like, and that I share with my students all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. But that's part of what I love about the classroom is I do get to share stories, my story, stories from a variety of experiences, and to do so in a way, I use the word critical, being sort of a framework for being thoughtful about people's stories, and honoring each other. Um, so I also know that that sense of criticality comes into your work as well.
100%. 100%. And I also think that a lot of us who get overeducated, like you and I, at least for me and my husband and I talk about it all the time, that, it's a path to understand our own lives. It's a path to understand our own pains and confusions and everything else. And race is a big part of that story. I was adultified at a young age. I was the eldest, so I had a lot of responsibilities with parents who worked 7 days a week. We didn't see them.
Mhm,
And mine was a classed story as well. I was working class. My parents were very, very poor in Greece. And then we were working class until we transitioned to middle class. And so I'm a class migrant. Didn't even know what these words were until the last 5 years, probably, I've been on this.
mhm.
Um, and it is helping me understand so much of my own life and the life of my family. And man, is it resonating with students,
Yeah.
working class students especially.
Yeah, yeah. But I also appreciate that there's sort of this myth that as a scholar you study one particular thing, and it's this little boxed thing. Um, but your work is really across this sort of network of shared experiences.
And I love people who do that. Molly Blackburn does such gorgeous work around LGBTQIA issues, but she does
Mm-hmm.
it in very different, very variant ways across her body of work. I'm somebody who follows my curiosity and honestly my ignorance. Like what happens is I'll read something and just I feel like it's, oh my God, I'm implicated in everything Nancy Lesko wrote, hence 7 years of work on adolescence. I'm implicated in every single thing about critical whiteness, hence the last 8, 9 years. And then I picked up some books on class and I thought, oh my God, I can't even stand myself. I can't even stand this level of ignorance about something that explains so much of my experience and the experiences of so many. It's not just working class folks. I mean, we're all classed individuals. And this is, if race is a silenced discourse, especially in white spaces,
Mhm.
class is a silenced discourse everywhere.
Yeah.
People know what their own family's money situation is, but it doesn't mean that's talked about
Mhm.
because there's so
Mhm.
much shame attached, especially if you're struggling. But then class is about so much more than money and so much more than money and power. And learning about all that stuff has been just amazing for me, um, and for students.
Yeah. So curious, as you're thinking about teachers and the teachers you've worked with, any particular idea or question that you would share with teachers to be thinking about as it relates to your work when they're working with students, with their students in classrooms?
With social class.
Hmm.
So I'd say, I mean, it's just humbling to acknowledge how little I understood. Like I understood people said like school's a middle class institution. I didn't understand what that meant.
Hmm.
And I think that's because you need to get down to the nitty gritty and understand. And so for a question for teachers is if schools are a middle class institution, then what might be some of the many ways we are inflicting class-based injury, which on students without realizing it at all,
Hmm.
without meaning to at all. And and in ways that the students won't know it's about class either,
Hmm.
um, necessarily, especially if they don't have the vocabulary, which is part of what I build in my classes. Um, and just one of the books, and it was, I need to acknowledge two big thank yous, three big thank yous about helping I usually get help to get less ignorant about these things, and Carlin helped me on my road to like working on race. I begged for someone like that in my life to just let me learn. And I was at NSETE rooming with Amanda Hartling-Tyne, and I said, my next area of ignorance that I need to start working on is social class, but I do not want to read Marx. I don't want to do a Marxist approach. It's not that there's anything wrong with it.
Hmm.
Any treatment of social class has a debt to Marxism, but I just hadn't been persuaded. And I do literature instruction, as you know, Jason, and I just hadn't found big, obvious, consistent ways that my limited understanding of Marxism could open up literature in ways that I could see really working in middle schools and high schools, which is what I care about. And she's like, read this book. And she handed over Julie Betty's Woman Without Class, which is so good.
Hmm.
And it focuses on a sociocultural understanding of social class that I'd never heard of. And it was everything I was looking for, right? So if Marxism, do you want me to do my little spiel, my little soundbite on what this
By all
is?
means, by all
So
means.
if Marxism is a critique of capitalism, the structural forces, okay, if when we do race work, you are critiquing white supremacy, right?
Hmm.
Whiteness. In
Hmm.
social class, Marxism is critiquing capitalism, right? And in many ways, so much of a sociocultural approach is absolutely implicit in Marxism, but it's not what Marxism is aiming to do. It's aiming to to point to structural oppressive forces.
Hmm.
A sociocultural approach to understanding social class focuses on the thoughts and feelings and beliefs of living class lives under capitalism.
Hmm.
So what I teach is terms that I learned from Julie Betty, for example, and a whole bunch of Brits who were doing this in like the early aughts.
Hmm.
Terms like class injury. So that's the equivalent in class terms to a racial microaggression, right? It's something that it's pain inflicted on someone or inflicted on us because of class difference, or you're a mismatch for whatever the class expectations are of an occasion or an expectation. I teach things like cultural capital, which I'd read that in Pierre Bourdieu when I was a doc student, but I
Hmm.
didn't get it. But so cultural capital is Pierre Bourdieu's explanation of why, he was looking at French public schools. So and tell me if I'm going too theoretical, because
No,
I
you're
promise
fine. You're
it's
fine.
super relevant, but it sounds like it's a peer, but it has so much relevance day to day.
Hmm.
He's trying to figure out, why is it that middle class kids do so much better in schools than working class kids or poor kids? And he just
Yeah.
wasn't convinced that it was anything inherent in a moneyed family. And so what he came up with is the idea is like, it's not just about economic capital, it's about cultural capital. The
Hmm.
things you learn in a middle class home from birth about things that are valued in schools and other educational institutions that eventually get you more economic capital. So, for example, what books you read, and the fact that you have books to read, and what
Hmm.
different art pieces are, and places in the world that have cultural value in particular middle class, usually white spaces, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And so if a first generation student is the first one to come to college and has no idea what office hours are, doesn't know that when you show up to office hours, you're actually showing interest in a class, things that I had no idea about.
Right.
I didn't go to my professor's office hours till I was a junior, and had transferred to a new school, and was like, oh my gosh, this school's harder and I need to do better. I had no idea. And so part of acknowledging all of these classed um, experiences and knowledge that go with cultural capital that make someone's experiences in college, for example, better and more successful, is like pulling back the veil and doing an explanation to first generation students who
Hmm.
might not know, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but all of this applies to literature too, to literature analysis,
Hmm.
because if these are the things we struggle with every day, that's what literature represents. And so now you have a whole new vocabulary for examining characterization, especially
Hmm.
theme, especially, and setting,
Yeah.
right? So um, when I go through literature texts with students, some canonic, but a lot of YA, because I teach a YA class as well.
Hmm.
And we talk about, well, what do you notice now? Even books they've read before. Like I did an honor seminar last semester, a whole semester on social class, not an English major in sight. A lot of education majors were in the room. And we did Gatsby, which I didn't want to do, but I'm like, if I'm going to do social class, I've got to do Gatsby. I need to figure
Right.
this out.
Yeah.
Oh, I had a student who's had 3 copies of Gatsby. She'd read it so many times and loved it and hated it too. She was working class.
Yeah.
But when we got to sociocultural understanding of what was going on in that novel, it just changed the way you see why Daisy is so caught up in what it's not just to keep the money, it's also saving face in class terms.
Hmm.
Gatsby, like the preoccupation about where did Gatsby get his money? I don't think it's a moral question, because all these people are going to bootleg parties, right?
Hmm.
So it's more about, where, what are we going to think about? Does he have enough cultural capital to keep up
Right.
with the Buchanans
Hmm.
in
Hmm.
there? And that's a whole different set of themes that emerges when you're looking at it from this lens.
Yeah, yeah. I've also just recently revisited Gatsby, and the number of questions that it brings up in terms of gender, class, interactions among people. It's really interesting, and a different way of seeing that book beyond just the like, here's the great American novel story. Because it really gets at that question of, when you approach it that way, how do people react? How do people interact? And what are their identities and customs built of?
Yep, exactly. And anytime you have a book like that where you've also got big class differences in contact,
Hmm.
you're going to have class injury. You're going to have examples of missing cultural capital. So it's going to be all these tensions and conflicts, but there's no vocabulary for this. There's never been a vocabulary for this. We need a vocabulary for social class, for understanding literature and for understanding our lives too.
Yeah, yeah. And just thinking about the ways that these ideas come up in everyday life, as you mentioned, uh, that idea of these kids versus those kids, which
Right.
is still common vernacular among school systems. The idea that a child has that, oh, well, I can't do that because I'm from this place or this is my family. So I love the possibilities for thinking about breaking down barriers and sort of recentering the space and saying, what is your agency? What are you doing? And how are you understanding yourself with this idea in mind of where you want to be in life and what you want to explore?
So one of the things, I mean, I started this, I embed this now in my young adult lit class for English teachers. I do like a 2 to 3 week unit on this. And last fall, I studied the impact of doing this on juniors and the few grad students that were in the room, all teacher candidates, a couple in-service teachers. And we read two working class YA novels,
Hmm.
um, a middle grade one called The Benefits of Being an Octopus,
Yeah, I
and
love that one.
excellent, and Piecing Me Together by Renee Watson about
Oh
African
yeah.
American. Um, and these books, first of all, I can say that, so it was also, um, until we start asking, we don't know the social class identities of our students either. And it was part of the study. So I asked. And so the students who ended up completing the class and the study were about 13 students, and four were middle class, always consistently. Everybody else was either always working class or had a significant part of their life that was working class. And what I've learned doing this is once working class, always working class, and some part of who we are, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
I will react to something going on in my life and like, what was that? And I'm middle class now and have been for a long time, but that was straight out of my working class beginnings. And
Hmm. Hmm.
it helps to start to keep track of these things, right? But students in the room, especially, everybody loved it. The middle class students were sort of learning from the working class students because I made the big mistake of only featuring working class texts on my first round. I don't do that now. But the what you just talked about, Jason, about the intersection of social class and self-worth
Hmm.
and a sense of agency that accompanies that or does not was very big.
Yeah.
And I, on the first day that for the benefits of being an octopus, I asked what I call a social class reader response question, which is, how does your own social class identity affect the way you read the class experiences of the main characters? And, I didn't know what was going to happen. And it was like they journaled to this, and then it was floodgates. And, because it's a sensitive topic, I knew it was a silence topic. I went in there the way I went in the beginning about teaching about race, really carefully, set up a brave space in advance, told them that this was a research, the whole thing. First thing out the door was divulging about student, like right off at the door, like, I grew up working class, I understand Zoe, that was my experience. Her mom being stuck in that relationship and leaving that guy took so much courage. Like, he'd spun the story from a story of victimhood to a
Hmm.
story of courage and agency. But he's like, her sense of low self-esteem was I recognize that in myself. It was like, and then it was like boom, 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 everybody commented on it in the interview, like, oh my God, how did that? I did too. Like, thank
Yeah.
you for opening the brave space. But it was clear also that, like, this has never been discussed in a public space before. This has never been discussed in the classroom. This has never been deemed valuable.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
I did questionnaires before I started the unit because it was a research study. And, what's your social class? Why do you think so? A bunch of questions. And the very last question is, anything else you want me to know? No one answered that question except for one student, working class student. And she wrote, thank you for, and they all knew I was new to this too. I'm like, I'm going to just watch me fumble and fall. It's going to be a mess, but I'm going to try. Thank you for taking this on. I want people to know that it's not our fault. I want people to understand the truth about these classed circumstances. And I'm like, you don't even know me. You don't know what kind of like, they don't, this is a junior, like, they've never had me before. They have no idea what kind of class I'm going to teach. What
Hmm.
are you thinking me for in advance? It's because, like, she thought she assumed that by taking it on at all, it was going to take on stereotypes surrounding social class. And I got gratitude before doing a thing. What, I mean, you
Wow.
think about that though, Jason? Like, that's big.
Yeah. Yeah.
Big. And she was amazing in this unit. She taught us all. It has been a really remarkable experience doing this. I just pitched it as we're revising our core at the university, and I just pitched it as a core class that
Mhm.
anybody coming to our institution should have this grounding in social class.
May it be so. May it be so. I also love what you were saying there about bringing literature in, and I think literature just has this amazing way of opening up those conversations, and it's almost a sounding board. It's almost a prop, or props maybe not the right word, but a talking piece to go, oh yeah. And that way I'm not directly saying this is my experience, but I can sort of say, hey, there's this sort of filter for my experience that I can relate to.
That's what everybody said. Because when
Mhm,
in the interviews I said, it was clearly like my research questions are, would they affect their literary interpretations to build this social class literacy? Would do they apply to their lives? Because prior research noted those gaps and
mhm,
it was yes, yes. So it was like boring. So I had to figure out a way. I have one article under review on this, but um, I just lost what you were saying. Everybody said, like when I asked them in interviews, would you teach this in high school or middle school? They said, you know, I'm in college now. I've had time to process some of this basically class trauma.
mhm,
Some of my students grew up very, very poor. And um, I don't know that I would have been okay with talking about this in high school, but the literature means you're not talking about yourself, you're talking about the literature. And so that was really interesting. And right now I'm conducting a study at a high school in the state, and it's we have a big event coming up actually in 2 weeks where the like 40 students who are reading that novel, Piecing Me Together, are coming to campus to share the impact of learning about social class with their 12th grade English class.
mhm.
And we're curious, like they're starting to write about that applications to their lives in journals, but we're not sure that they're going to share out loud, even especially at this event too in high school. But everybody, like even the students who are working class especially said it's going to be hard, but it has to be done because being stuck under that burden with no vocabulary and no understanding is so much harder.
Mhm.
And so I'm very curious how this is going to go.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, my typical final question is resources, but it sounds like you're creating those. So I don't know if you want to close with resources or some questions for listeners to consider. What would be the best sort of cap on the conversation?
So I started teaching this in grad courses during the pandemic. It was spring 2020. And one of my students, Nicole Godar, took it and then designed her entire master's thesis around a research study that she conducted with her high school seniors, students of color. And she got published in the March 22 English Journal. And I
Mhm,
recommend this article. I teach her article, which has some of my curriculum and some of her curriculum. It's called Beyond Marx.
mhm,
She is
mhm,
moving into so she blends like a Marxist approach and has really great chart of literary analysis questions and a sociocultural approach and has Bourdieu in there too. It's super smart. She's super smart. That's a great resource for getting started. And she features Gatsby.
mhm,
That's what
mhm,
she was teaching. Um, and then, I mean, I would recommend Julie Betty's work, especially for anybody who's at the doctoral level who's working on this or master's level. It's such a great book, Woman Without Class. And I love some articles that have really helped me. There's an article called Spotlighting Social Class in the Journal of Literacy Research by, let's see if I'm going to get this right, Chandler Olcott and Payne Borsey, maybe reversed,
mhm, mhm,
tracking a high school student, all 4 years of high school, and then into college, a working class first gen student, and what happened and what was missing. That really impacted my research study. And Amanda Tyne has a co-authored article on literature circles working on Bastard out of Carolina
mhm,
and talking
mhm.
about what happens when you don't build a critical social class lens. I think all of those are really relevant. And I'm hustling. I'm on sabbatical next semester and hoping to hustle to get some stuff out. So we'll see if we have some more.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Well, Sophia Sarigianides, Thank you so much for joining, talking with me. And again, so great to put a voice and a face with a name because I've read your work for some time. We've been in touch. We did a written interview, but wonderful to meet in synchronous space.
The same, Jason. Thank you so much. What an honor to be on in your space to do this and have this conversation. I greatly appreciate it.
Absolutely. Anytime. Anytime. Thank you again.
Thank you.